Why I Am Not a Liberal from Imperium Press is the first book in their Studies in Reaction series, which according to them is a collection of essential works in the history of reactionary thought. The book contains a transcript of a 2009 interview with Jonathan Bowden, in which Bowden discusses a variety of topics including European politics, paganism and Christianity, the threat of Islam, and Friedrich Nietzsche. While it is sadly the case that Jonathan Bowden is no longer with us, having passed away from heart failure in 2012, this book nevertheless bestows upon readers countless insights from one of the right wing's brightest intellectuals. After opening the book, readers will quickly discover that Bowden addresses a very broad range of subjects. Far from being a treatise solely on the problems with liberalism, as I annotated the book's margins, I counted no less than 33 distinct topics of discussion within its pages. All 33 of these were interesting enough to cause me to jot down notes in the margins. But in order to dial in on the book's most useful ideas, I shall highlight 5 areas which were the most thought-provoking. These are: on liberalism, the European versus American political situations, paganism and Christianity, Nietzscheanism, and what to keep in mind going forward. Beginning with the titular subject of why Jonathan Bowden is not a liberal, when asked, Bowden remarked that liberalism was neither deep nor sincere. He explains to the interviewer that when his mom died and he was grieving, it struck him that the way most people in society dealt with anything profound or anything tragic was in a very superficial, shallow, and materialistic way. Bowden detested the irreligious and materialistic aspects of liberalism, which he could not help but notice in his time of grief. While the metaphysical shallowness and insincerity of liberalism contributed to Bowden not being a liberal, they were not the only reasons Bowden rejected liberalism. Equally important is that liberalism, as well as the left more broadly, see inequality as evil, whereas Jonathan Bowden sees it as both natural and good. To quote Bowden, "I believe human inequality is the basis of life, but also the basis of morality, because I believe inequality is a moral force. The real division between the left and the right is not about people who support socialized medicine, or even much more harsh measures, if you like, or divisive measures, like ethnicity or abortion or whatever. The real division, philosophically, is those who believe that equality, enforced or otherwise, is a moral good, broadly the general left, and those who believe, and are often too frightened to say so, that inequality is a moral good, which is what the philosophical right really believes in." Bowden then goes on to further buttress the case against equality by pointing out that so long as you have opportunity, you'll have inequality even in a Marxist system. Social engineering cannot get rid of natural excellence, and the best human capital will always rise to the top of a system, while those lacking innate excellence will not. Ergo, Bowden calls the Trotskyist idea of socialism leading to a Goethe or a Kant on every street corner as completely counter-propositional and insane. A final point worthy of mention concerning liberalism comes later in the interview. Jonathan Bowden notes that liberalism has a false view of human nature as a consequence of its egalitarianism. He accuses liberalism of making the same mistake as the Pelagian heresy within Christianity, namely, that man is naturally good in all cases. As Bowden puts it, human nature has a loving and sympathetic side, but it also has an avaricious and competitive and aggressive side, and they, liberals, have not computed that properly. Furthermore, Bowden also says, there are important perspectival and situational and experiential and even physical differences which lead people to perceive the world differently and want different things. Thus, liberal policies such as multiculturalism, third world immigration, and the desegregation policies of the 1960s will not bring about utopia, but will do the exact opposite and cause massive levels of strife and human suffering. Group differences exist, and the denial of this fact dooms the children of liberal societies to suffer the consequences. In this regard, there is perhaps no better example than the experience of America for the boomers and the experience of America for the zoomers. Moving on to the next topic of interest, Bowden analyzes the European and American political situations with weighted emphasis on his homeland of Britain. Bowden rails against the Tory party and quotes Revelo P. Oliver, who once said, "Conservatism is not enough." According to Bowden, the Tory party is too conformist to liberal norms, too concerned with respectability, too snobbish, too materially comfortable, and above all, afraid. They are afraid of any right-wing policy that would actually address the problems of Britain because such policies are too reactionary or too fascistic. His diagnosis applies equally to parties like the Republican Party in America in 2009 and the German CDU party. As Bowden said, so, the death of conservatism is intellectual and moral death, whether it is the center-right here, or Christian democracy in Europe, or any intellectuality within the Republican Party in the United States. It's all part of a package. The center-right is bereft and valueless. Indeed, a strong center-right party is the worst obstacle for implementing genuine right-wing change. Had Bowden been alive for the past 12 years, he would have raised hell over the Tory government rejecting its mandate and importing record-high numbers of immigrants against its people's wishes. As for the other countries, Bowden refers to Germany as a defeated people and views America as the nexus of neoliberalism's power. He talks about Europe being quite tired as a civilization, and that if things do not change soon, in 100 years, Europe will cease to be. However, within this grim warning, he does offer some hope, saying that he believes it is possible for Europe to wake up, and that continental Europe has a richer strain of right-wing thought than Britain or America does. As for the United States, he says the best thing the United States can do for itself and for Europe is to implement neo-isolationism and stop leading the West to its death. This portion of the interview as a whole was in my mind the most grim, but it is here I would like to offer some white pills. Today, the American right is nothing like the John McCain era, and on Twitter, people openly address problems like anti-whiteism and Jewish influence. The veneer of democracy has been shattered by the 2020 election, and trite myths from the McCain era of how politics really works have been utterly dispelled. In Europe, the situation is bleaker, but certainly one white pill that has to be mentioned is the existence of the AfD party in Germany. The idea of Germans singing Ausländer raus and the existence of an anti-immigration party would likely have seemed fanciful to Bowden in 2009. Therefore, it behooves us as men and women of the right to avoid the black pill and remember what we have risen above. The next topic to discuss is paganism versus Christianity. Jonathan Bowden was known to wear a pendant with the Othala rune on it, and this prompted the interviewer to ask him about paganism and Christianity. To quote part of his response to the interviewer, Bowden says, "I think people should identify with what they are and the values that they hold. This symbol really means strength or courage or masculinity or the first man or the first principle or the metaphysics of conflict. So, I just think it's a positive system of value. I never really was a Christian. Culturally, I have a great admiration for elements of Christian art, more so than people who are pagan who have violently reacted against it. I don't really share that emotionalism. But I don't agree with Christian ethics. Deep down, they've ruined the West, and we're in the state that we are because of them." Bowden contrasts Christianity, which he says is a religion of tolerance, love, and peace, with paganism, which he argues is natural law-oriented and morally fascistic. To exemplify the difference between the two religions, Bowden tells the interviewer a story about how when he was in school, an elderly Christian gentleman teacher was disturbed at seeing Catholic kids pull a boy's blazer over his head and start kicking him. The man asked Jonathan why his classmates were behaving like bullies, and Bowden told the man that it was an all-boys school, and that they were fighting violently with each other for hierarchy and supremacy. The teacher, who was appalled, told young Bowden that that was terrible, and that it was no better than behaving like a guerrilla colony. Bowden told the teacher, quote, "That's life. You have an ideal about how it should be, but that's not how it is." The lesson of this anecdote as it pertains to Christianity versus paganism is that Christian morals are centered on weakness and an aversion to violence, while pagan morality is about strength and fighting back when someone strikes you. This smoothly segues us into the next topic, which is Bowden's Nietzschean philosophy. Summarizing the Nietzschean outlook on the world, Bowden states that strength is morality, weakness is sin. Weakness requires punishment. If you're weak, if you're obese, if you're a drug addict, become less so. Become stronger. Move towards the sun. Become more coherent. Become more articulate. Cast more of a shadow. It's almost like a positive behaviorism in some ways, but it's not somebody wagging their finger and so on, because you're doing it for yourself. It comes from the inside. Here we can see why Nietzscheanism meshes well with paganism, but not so well with Christianity. Nietzsche opposed the slave morality of Christianity with its messages of turning the other cheek and God loving the meek the most. Instead, Nietzsche wanted people to better themselves and rise above things like weakness, resentment, and slave morality, while taking life by the reins. This is the meaning of the Übermensch in a nutshell. When asked by the interviewer how to spread Nietzscheanism as an idea, Bowden responded that, "You've got to get people quite young. I think you've got to introduce alternative value systems to them. This is a society that says weakness is good, weakness should be pitied, the ill are weak, the disabled are weak, the people who've got various things wrong with them need help. They may need help, but the value system that lies behind that desire to help worships the fact of weakness and the fact that people are broken. If you worship the idea of strength and tell the weak to become stronger, which is the reverse idea for helping them essentially, you help them in order to get stronger." This quote is important because often Nietzsche is charged by both leftists and Christians of being callous and sadistic towards the vulnerable. But as this quote shows, Nietzscheanism is not about enacting malevolence against the weak. It is about overcoming weakness so that a person can live a better life. Rather than exalt the condition of weakness that causes a person misery, like leftism or Christianity does, Nietzscheanism tells them to rise above it through their own effort and thus become a greater human, an Übermensch. Moving on to the final topic, we come to the matter of what Jonathan Bowden believes we should keep in mind going forward. Throughout the book at various points, Bowden reiterates that the problem facing the West is of an ethical or moral character rather than a chiefly political one. To quote Bowden, "More people will come forward when it, right-wing ideas, becomes the normal oppositional current. But what will change the view isn't fashionability and isn't accessibility, it's morality. For a significant proportion of the generations born after the Second World War, radical right-wing positions, they believe, are instinctually immoral. When you break through that, you will tap the idealism that goes into green politics, that goes into anti-federalism, that goes into politics about animals, and all these slightly peripheral things. In some ways, it's an ethical question. If you can break through that barrier, the idealism of the young and others is there for you, but I don't think you'll get large numbers of people until that happens." At the end of the book, Bowden explains that he is not a pessimist like Oswald Spengler, and reminds readers that anything can change. Out of all the things discussed in the interview, I believe the last few pages of the book to be the most important because they rail against black-pilled mentality. Bowden goes as far to say that as long as we are still here, everything is possible, and that one man with a computer can lead to massive changes in society. He ends the interview with a call for creativity and the need to make the right more energetic, radical, intelligent, and cooler than the left and center. As Bowden says on the last page regarding the force that animates a zeitgeist, the energy can be taken and changed and moved in a new direction, you see. Everything is about energy. Master it, control it, and you control the world. In conclusion, Imperium Press's Why I Am Not a Liberal by Jonathan Bowden is much more than a mere polemic against liberalism. It is a window into the thought process of a genius who sadly was taken from us far sooner than any of us would have liked. Audio and visual recordings of the interview exist, which I shall link in the description, but this may prompt viewers to ask themselves why anyone should buy the book. For me, the reasons are threefold. Imperium Press is a small publisher that shares our values in a cutthroat industry, and as such, it is our duty to patronize them with our dollar and not buy from Amazon when at all possible. This is for political reasons. Secondly, there is also the matter that audio-visual recordings exist so long as YouTube lets them exist. If Neil Mohan wants to remove all content of Jonathan Bowden, then he could with the press of a button, which is why owning physical copies of things is so important. Lastly but not least, I am a bibliophile, and I like collecting books. Having this book in print makes a fine addition to my library, as it would for yours.